round of applause for the panel. I think we heard some pretty diverse perspectives there. I mean, I heard some themes though. The glass is half full. I heard each one of you talk about pragmatic approaches. John Wiebe said this morning, the green economy is here to stay, and in this panel and this morning's discussion, and I'm sure around this building, we're going to hear a lot about opportunities. So the theme to me is that people are just going to play through and continue to be quite results-oriented, and they're looking for pragmatic engagement. But there's a bit of a disconnect there, because I also hear that yes, there's bottom-up initiatives, and yes, there are good things that need to happen, but at some point that has to merge with a multilateral or a developing conversation. So in my first question to the panel, just open it up to some ideas about how are we going to get from a patchwork, a number of pragmatic initiatives, yes, forward momentum, but from here to there. And some people are setting expectations that Mexico in 8 months is going to yield a legally binding agreement. That seems like an unrealistic timetable. So I open it up to you.
Well, I think there's a very simple approach that I tend to use. I look at performance-based results. I can't spend, and I'm not suggesting that you spend your life worrying about how fast governments will move on getting to a legally binding agreement. I think if the intensity of the dialogue that Graham mentions between the public and the private sector works as it should, then there'll be incentives to get there faster. I do believe that I've never seen so much in terms of proliferation of efforts by the private sector, by the new technology companies. If we talk about a glass being half full, in effect it is, and it's up to us to make sure that we keep filling that glass. I'm also encouraged by the fact that many of the governance issues are now being managed not at the international level, but at the national and subnational levels. This is not an environment in which we can simply point the finger and say to governments, it's your responsibility. It's also ours. I'll give you an example. It's not politically appealing for politicians at any level to convince you as consumers that you should be paying more for energy. But the point is that we're going to have to pay more for energy, if only to stop wasting it and to give it its proper value. It's also not appealing for politicians to say that, we're going to monetize carbon, whether it's through a carbon tax or whether it's through carbon-based market mechanisms. But it's going to happen. And so it's really incumbent upon us to get involved in this dialogue and to let the politicians know that the solutions do not lie in simply the status quo or business as usual. And that as we move along, to use what my colleagues have said, politicians are going to have to find the courage at some stage to create the policies and the regulatory frameworks and to sell them to their constituents and to the consumers so that we can accelerate the pace of change in some of these critical sectors. And one of them certainly is low carbon energy, greener energy. I use that term because I'm not one of those people who believe that we can simply nilly-willy go from where we are to fossil fuel independence between today and tomorrow. When I was in Copenhagen, I went to visit the Danish Energy Agency, and their goal is to become independent of fossil fuels, totally independent. Now, you think about Denmark. a lot of wind power, a much smaller jurisdiction, and people who are committed to getting this done. The guess is, when do they think they could do it? My question was, when do you think you'll be able to achieve this? The answer was, well, maybe by 2078. So this isn't for tomorrow, but it is going to call on a lot of actors at a lot of different levels to continue to deal with this issue and to face facts, not just opinions, but facts going forward. And I make that distinction because oftentimes I'm presented with an opinion and I'm told it's a fact. And when I do my research and I go back and I find that it's not factual. I'll give you an example. Subsidies on biofuels. I was absolutely convinced until David Runnels and the IISD and the board approved a program to look at subsidization of biofuels by the US, by Canada, by the Europeans. And when I looked at that study, I realized that we were throwing a lot of money, collectively, individual governments, and literally wasting it because we weren't getting the anticipated results. The reality is that some subsidies did lead to performance-based results and others did not. And we have to have the intellectual integrity behind our research and our economic analysis to be able to understand what works and what doesn't work. It sounds like a simple proposition, but as you work your way through political lobbies, business lobbies, environmental lobbyists, you know, you can actually get lost in that maze and fall into the trap of mistaking all kinds of opinions for facts or for results. And I think that's a very serious trap to fall into.
Sounds like a time waster. So how do we get from that bottom up to the binding international agreement?
So I think something that David said is quite the right way to think about it. It's because the bottom-up activity can set the example and produce the confidence that those kinds of approaches or structures could work, and if they're replicated at a higher level. And the way I think about that is it's a harmonization process over time. So I think that we have to have that objective in mind, but we shouldn't shy away from taking even an experimental view around how we do some of that stuff at the more local level. So rather unsurprisingly, we take the view that fossil fuels will be a very significant part of the energy mix for most of the 21st century. And therefore, there are some things that are key parts of the solution for low carbon energy. By the way, I think that we will have to build all of the renewable energy that society has the appetite and the capability to build in any event, as well as an ongoing role for fossil fuels. But the issues that raises are, first of all, you need CO2 capture and storage. So if you look at that pragmatically, what you now see is that various regions in the world are taking various different approaches, but all of them are adding up to something that looks like the 20 demos that the G8 called for to be delivering around 2015 or so. So you have the Europeans, you have Canada, you have the United States, you have Australia and a number of other actors. And the key issue there becomes for me, how do you share the knowledge generated in each of the individual programs to create more from the sum of the whole? So that's an example of how important stuff can get done in any event, and you just need to drive those things forward. I think there are examples in other places. So we know that there's a significant amount of market-based instrumentation in play. You have the European ETS, you have the Western Climate Initiative, etc. And we'll see how those progress. So we should support those working even in the absence of overarching agreements in order to demonstrate that the outcome can be achieved. And I think that's what drives the change. It creates the confidence that all of this stuff can work. And it becomes more important to demonstrate and work with these things than it is to argue specifically for the very one thing you would most like yourself. So there's a great danger that if you seek that perfect solution, there will be no solutions at all.
Right. Dan or David?
I absolutely agree with that. Our experience in trying to work with communities globally on the issues of sustainability is you get a lot further listening to people locally and understanding their priorities and engaging them and have the solutions be their solutions. It's their futures they're talking about. And I think that that's sort of what Paul Collier speaks about in the bottom billion when he looks at how much we've spent globally on poverty eradication in the trillions of dollars and how much we've achieved as a result of it. And I'm concerned about global solutions to a problem. I think that it's natural for all of us to want to be in control of or have an impact or an input into what happens in our own backyard. And I think that's a very key element to this, that there is no one specific solution, that each country's got different challenges. Look at Canada. We're like, in terms of where our population is, we're like Chile on its side with everybody within 100 miles of the American border, a lot of us. And we're in a northern climate with transportation challenges, high energy import, and a pretty, high footprint per capita, one of the highest in the world. Well, that's our reality. We're also a resource-based economy that ships the kinds of products that are going to be used to build sustainable futures around the world. That's a reality. How are we going to factor those things into a solution that makes sense for Canada, but is still contributing to an overall global goal setting? And I think this isn't the kind of dialogue I think that can happen every 8 months or 2 years. I think you've got to create an institutional capacity to be bringing these things to the table on a daily basis and being able to report on what your country is doing year over year. We should be helping developing countries to develop their own capacity in these areas where they need it, when they ask us for it. And that's the kind of approach I think that the Paul Colliers of the world would support. And I think that their experience and our own experience as a company would support that.
Obviously, I agree with all the policies we just talked about. But I'll still take it back to industry as well. The business case for sustainability, I mean, it's a proven, it's not more expensive. If you look at what we've done, our recycled content's cheaper than virgin. We've reduced our energy footprint by 40%. We're that much more energy efficient. The renewables really are not more expensive than we use today. We pipe the landfill gas 3 miles to our plant to run our plant in LaGrange, Georgia. And the goodwill with the customer and with the industry, to me, it's the private sector is going to drive the public sector in a lot of ways because sustainability is a better business model. I mean, less is more. We've dematerialized the product. We've eliminated a significant amount of waste out of our product. And the marketplace is rewarding companies, to me, that are taking the business case to them saying, these products are more sustainable than those products, and you haven't given or sacrificed anything in quality, fashion, and so forth with a product. And we're just, as a company, going to get on with it and support the governments where we can. And I do believe the Senate will pass an energy bill, and we're going to have a carbon tax or cap and trade, and it's going to drive innovation. I do believe that's going to happen. And so the glass is half full, no question. But there is a business case for sustainability, and companies that get on with it are going to benefit from it because our thesis is oil's going to $200 a barrel. And so why not start now?